How do you work with the spacing out? Okay, let's start with spaciousness.
Yes.
Um, so, spaciousness and spacing out are not the same thing.
No.
Of course, being spaced out, being spacey is really not being attentive, and it's a certain quality of mind that's there. Um, and spaciousness is an adjective we use to describe a quality of mind. Um, I gave a talk a few weeks back about, the furniture in the room, and walking in a room and looking at, being aware of the space in the room as opposed to the objects in the room. And then I made a comparison um, between that and, of course, watching the mind. That there is the content of the mind, but there is this field of awareness in which the content appears. Um, so when we are focusing or moving our attention towards that sense of space or that sense of an awareness, um, it's a little bit tricky because it's not an object in the normal sense. So it's easy to get lost. It's easy to get distracted. And so when you're saying, Susan, that you get spacey, I'm assuming that you're kind of losing the focus on the awareness itself and sort
And
of,
I can watch myself doing that, but I don't seem to be able to do anything about it.
okay. So you can watch yourself doing it. Who's watching?
Good question. I can be aware that I'm losing awareness of the spaciousness. That sounds really bizarre, but
Yeah, yeah. But I wouldn't, the the point, um, there's a few points in there, obviously. But first of all, as I always say, and as I always say with you, work on the concentration factor a little bit more. So when we move from awareness of the breath to awareness of awareness itself, or awareness of what we may want to call space or spaciousness, then we still we still have the breath in the background. It's like it's still there as an anchor.
okay.
And so there's this way where we're watching the mind, if you will. We're watching the content of mind, or we're watching where we're looking in that direction, let's say. Um, but we still have an awareness of the breath. It's like 20% breath, 80% looking directly at mind itself.
Okay. All right.
So we have that aspect, but it's also important to not get too caught up in the word spaciousness or space. Um, so in the Dzogchen teachings, they say that the mind is space-like, or awareness is space-like, but it's not space. Um, I read the other the other day that one of the Rinpoches was saying, you know it, describing the nature of mind, um, what was the word he used? Instead of spaciousness, he used the word groundlessness. And
Oh,
he was saying in some ways that's a better description of
mhm.
mind. Um, uh, we have this, uh, and then there's another quote that's circling around in my head. Um, anyway, we'll have to leave that quote for now. But um, so there's this when they describe the nature of mind, when the nature of mind is being described, the words often that are used are emptiness and cognizant. So there's this knowing factor, but when you look for it, you can't find it. You can't find something.
Yeah.
If you look at thought, if you look at feeling, if you look at any of the objects of mind, there's no ground to them in that they appear and they disappear. So there's a basic groundless nature to our experience. It's here and it's gone. There is also within this experience, there's this cognition, there's this awareness factor. So when we look at mind, we see this awareness factor, and we see that there's no ground in a way. Everything is
Mhm.
just disappearing, is dropping away. So the awareness, when we begin to look at the awareness itself, what we come to is we get to the sense of this knowing factor. Like it's our, that's why we get confused about the idea of no self. It's like, well, I'm here. Like I know I'm here. And if anybody watch the Ramana film the other night? Yeah, that was excellent. And anyway, his teaching was going into that sense of the I am factor, that there's this sense of the knower that always seems to be here. But when we look at the knower, there is only this emptiness factor. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing you can really point to except this feeling of beingness or I amness. So when we go back to the analogy of the room and looking at the spaciousness in the room or the space in the room, the space is really an adjective to describe this groundless factor, that there's
Yeah.
actually nothing here but this sense of knowingness. Um, so, Susan, when you said you go into the you go into the meditation and you get into this spaciousness or the spacious quality of mind, and you see your awareness kind of slipping away, go back to the knowing factor, right? Go back to that sense of the knower. But how you stay on track with that is you keep the breath in the background. So I sort of said a lot of things there in maybe not the most succinct way. So, are there any questions? Are there any questions I can clear up on what we've just been discussing?
So what I'm understanding is that when I'm in that awareness and I can see the awareness starting to slip, then I try
But so
and
so wait, but who's seeing that the awareness is slipping?
when I go into these states, like I'm not there,
Okay, okay,
and I can see
okay.
that maybe I go in so that I am there. So I can look at this more closely. But what I'm hearing you say is that I should bring up the breath again. Like I should,
Yeah, there's a quality of we're still in a subtle way. You're still working with concepts, right? We're still working with
yeah,
idea.
yeah,
We're still working with concept. And so when we have that sense of being with awareness or watching awareness, really, that's still an idea because the direct experience of awareness itself is no concept.
yeah,
It's not an idea. It's just it's a it's a very direct experience of what we're experiencing all the time, but a direct experience that is free of idea or concept. But we use ideas like groundlessness and spaciousness. We use those ideas to point the mind in the correct direction.
yeah,
But at some point, we simply try to remain aware of the experience that's coming up in the mind without grabbing onto any of those experiences. And then when we are able to look at that sense of the knower or look at that sense of awareness, then when we look into it, we see there's no base to it. We see that there's this groundless factor to it. It's not anything that we can point to. And within that experience, then that when we start to contemplate that, that opens us up to a deeper experience of the knowing factor or a deeper experience of awareness.
okay. I think I have some things that I can look at and work
Yeah,
with.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
And so you know one of the important aspects of this is staying with is to keep the breath close. So to keep the concentration factor close, because when we lose the concentration factor, then we tend to lose our ability to remain with what's happening in the
Yeah,
present moment.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be that deep of a concentration, but we're aware of what the mind is doing when the mind is doing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Rick, are you following this? Okay, good. Bill, you've got to have a question about this.
Not about this, about something else.
Okay,
You
what's
had
your
mentioned
question?
that well, you had mentioned that Ramana was a very important influence with you, and I was
Yeah.
wondering how he was an influence with you, and
How he was an influence with me? Yeah, well, uh, when I was in India, I would go to Truvavanamalai, which was where his ashram was, uh, every year. I would go there I would go there in the early in March. I would go there between March, April, May, um, and of course he had died a long time ago. But there was a group of us in those days who were doing a lot of meditation practice, and it was just a very powerful place to practice to begin with. And so I had some friends that would spend time there. So I went down in my first year after my first set of retreats in Bodh Gaya. I traveled down to Truvanamalai. So I was very fresh, very new, and I was doing the Vipassana practice, if you will, and there was a tremendous presence in Truvanamalai. The Hindus call it the abode of Shiva in the south. And that's where Shiva, they say that's where Shiva lives in South India. And there's a mountain there called Arunachala. And it's a huge hill, or, it's not like a Himalayan mountain, but it's a huge hill that has been used, I think, for thousands and thousands of years by sannyasis, by monks and nuns. And so the whole mountain just exudes this, I don't know, this vibration. And there's some caves in the mountains. And Ramana Maharshi went there as a young man and lived at the foot of the hill. And then he lived in the caves for several years. And he was somebody that had a spontaneous awakening when he was 16 years old and just left his family and traveled to Truvanamalai. I'm not sure why he went, but he was there. And so when I was there, the ashram was there, and there was also these caves that you could go to. And I would spend my days sitting in the meditation hall of the ashram or sitting in the caves in the hills. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain, but you sort of felt you were in the presence of this great being all the time that you were there. And so I did a lot of practice there. And so that was one of the ways that it influenced me, but also his teachings. There was a library there, and there were books there, so I read a lot of his teachings. And to me, his teachings are not. I didn't know it at the time because I didn't have the framework, but his teachings are the nature of mind. It's a Advaita Vedanta school, and it's basically the school of the non-dual, that there are not two things in our experience. There is only one thing, and that one thing is mind. And he taught that whatever our experience is, it's within our own mind. It's not outside your mind. And also the experience of that sense of I amness was a really powerful meditation practice. You would meditate on that sense of I am. And that's a really, throughout the Advaita Vedanta tradition in India, that is one of their main practices. And so I seem to really resonate with that practice. And it was really sitting quietly and looking at that sense of knowing, or that sense of the knower. And as it would be, there was also Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, who lived in Bombay at the time. And his books, there's well-known books about him called I Am That. which I would recommend anybody to read. And so there's kind of a group of us that would go, over the years, that would go from Bodh Gaya to Truvavanamalai to Bombay. It was kind of a well-worn route for certain types of practitioners. And so you would spend time in Truvanamalai, and then you'd go up to Bombay and meet the real deal in terms of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. And he was also known as the Beedi Baba because he sold beedis. He had a system with little Indian cigarettes. And that's how he supported his family. But he was in that tradition, and not exactly, but he was, generally speaking, that was his tradition. And then you would go and spend a couple of weeks with him, and he built an extra floor on the family home, and he taught from this room that held about 30 people. And you would sit in the room with him, and he would question you. He would question you to explore that sense of the knower, that sense of I am. And he would really bring you up to the front of the room and ask you questions about your experience. And somehow he would be able to bring you into this place where you would be having these really direct experiences of different things. And so it was really that tradition. Of Ramana Maharshi and then Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. It was really, it's all kind of the same thing for me. And then, of course, years later, I ended up receiving teachings from Poonjaji. And Poonjaji was an Indian man who had met Ramana Maharishi and had very direct experiences with him. He had gone down I guess in the 40s or the 50s, and I happened to hear about him. He's also known as Papaji, and I happened to hear about him before he was very well known. It was just before he was very well known, and so I spent 2 or 3 periods of time with Poonjaji, where I'd just be hanging out with him. And once again, same idea. They question you, and they bring you, somehow through their questions and their presence, they bring you into this experience of looking directly at that room, directly at the spaciousness, the I amness in that room. So it's sort of it's kind of interesting as you go through your life. There are certain themes that went through. I didn't look for any of this. I was doing like Buddhist meditation, but I went down to Truvanamalai because I heard it was a good place to sit. And then I got involved in this other kind of stream. And over the years, you realized that there was a lot of practitioners like myself that kind of, went kind of back and forth, if you will, between the two traditions. And then, of course, later on, I ended up, after spending time with Poonjaji, I ended up in Nepal with Urgyen Tulku Rinpoche, who's a Dzogchen master. And once again, if you're familiar with all of this, these are just really high level teachings of the nature of mind. And for whatever reason, my karma in this lifetime was to lead me to these different places. And so all of these teachers, I've never been somebody that wanted to be part of a tradition. and I've never been somebody that wanted to be a follower. I was always somebody that was intensely interested, but really wanted to have my own thoughts about it. Sometimes that served me and sometimes it didn't. And I think, though, there's a really good book that I'd forgotten about and I was rereading. It's called One Dharma, and it's from Joseph Goldstein. And he talks about this, about Buddhism in the West now, and how, teachers like himself, how, and Jack Kornfield, and I not to put myself on the same, in the same room as those people, but there's a whole generation of us that were in India in kind of the same time period. I wasn't there till the 70s and 80s and 90s. Joseph was there in the 60s. But I think because we were Westerners, we weren't that tied to tradition, and we just went after the teaching. And we weren't that concerned about what package it was in. Because the teaching gets presented in different packages, and people get really attached to what package is presented. And it's like, yeah, this is it. This is the way. You got to be this one or that one or that one. But they're all just packages. And I had the great fortune of meeting real masters. And so when you're in the room with them or you're in their presence, the things that are pointing out to you, you realize can't be contained in a package, can't be contained in a tradition, and can't be contained in a system. The systems and the traditions are only pointers. And for me, in my stumbling way, as people come to me for teachings and retreats and advice, in my own stumbling way, I really try to present this kind of wider view of the teaching, because I think that is, in the West, I think we have to find our own voice in our own way. And, and tradition is part of that, but it's only part of it. So how did Ramana Maharshi influence me? Well, by his presence, and I was there, 25 years after his passing, but he was still there, he was still there. And it's this really wide view of the Dharma that all of these other things may be helpful, but ultimately we have to look deeply, deeply, deeply into our own experience. And that's where the guru, that's where the teacher abides. Did you follow all that? Did you make notes? So, yeah. And I think Namgyal Rinpoche was like that as well. I think Namgyal Rinpoche was like that as well. Yeah. Hmm.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah. So One Dharma by Joseph Goldstein is is a pretty interesting book. And the other person that explains it, or what explains part of what I've been trying to explain as well, is Sam Harris, whatever his book is. And Sam Harris actually had the same kind of went through the same thing as me in terms of he was in the Vipassana tradition. He spent time with Poonjaji, and he ended up with Urgyen Tulku Rinpoche. So at least for part of his journey. And I realized later, the last time I saw Poonjaji, by that time he'd become well known. And there was a lot of people there, including a lot of teachers. The last time I was there, Joseph Goldstein was there, and Lama Suridas was there, and I think in that group was Sam Harris, but I wouldn't have recognized him because he was a nobody then. He's somebody now, but so a lot of us Westerners that went to Asia for our teaching. This is kind of the places that we went. Of course, there's lots of others who just stayed with one tradition, and want to make sure that the package remains unruffled, and all of those things. And then, but I truly believe that the progression of the Dharma, as it moves from each time period in each country and each culture, for it to remain alive and active and true, it has to find an expression through that culture. Otherwise, it just becomes dogma and ritual. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we get in a lot of trouble with religion on this planet. Causes a lot of stuff. So dogma and stuff just based on the past. There's a reason for it, but it's also very dangerous. So, yeah. And the other person, of course, was Krishnamurti. He was the other in my time. I was in Bombay seeing Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, and Krishnamurti came to town, and he was doing a talk, or he's doing a series of talks, and we would see Maharaj. We would go to his place in the morning for satsang, like at 8 in the morning, 8 or 9 in the morning, and 4 in the afternoon. Anyway, we went there one day, and he said, Krishnamurti's giving a talk tonight in Bombay. I don't want anybody to come and see me. I want you all to go and see Krishnamurti. So we did. Oh. We had the ability, with Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj as well. It was like he slept in the room that he taught in. His family slept downstairs. And I was going there with a friend of mine, and we realized satsang would start at, let's say it was 9. But we realized we could go there at 8:30 or 8:15, and we could just go up to the room. And the poor guy was just getting dressed and washing and stuff, but he didn't mind. And you could just quietly sit in the room and close your eyes. And he seemed to be okay with that. We were just wanted to spend as much time with him as we could. And they were so patient. So many of these teachers were. Poonjaji was the same way with me. I spent so much time with him. I know he got tired of me, but they were so patient with you. So that was really quite remarkable. And Sri Nisargadatta, I'm not Sri, Urgyen Tulku Rinpoche as well. I would see him every day. Oh no, not every day, but every second day or something. And he's a really famous guy, and it would just be me and one other person in the room with him and a translator. And he would always encourage me to come back more. And then his Tibetan attendant, every time we would go in, would scold us, like, don't spend so much time with them. Just ask a couple of questions and go. But Urgyen Tulku Rinpoche wouldn't let us go. They just keep you, and they just want to pour all this stuff into you, and it's really was quite something. So that's how did Ramana influence me? Well, that's kind of some of the influences that I had.